assume that some of the family are within this area, so it does make it really hard to decide whether you leave or not.
Right.
So kind of two factors that start to really play.
Right.
And who's making that kind of judgment on people? Is that coming from the people that are staying towards it?
Yeah.
So it's quite a stigma for...
Right, so it's unfortunate that those who decide to leave or those who decide to remain have kind of conflict feelings instead of like getting together and fight against government, you know? It's like make the evacuation zone bigger or, you know, make compensation available to more people than limiting or...
I don't think it's so much denial. Like I'm thinking, because what you were saying about people's attachment to the land, it's maybe because of that, even the concept of possibly moving out doesn't exist when you have such a connection.
Exactly.
So,
It's home.
yeah, it's home. You know, where else could you go, kind of thing. So, yeah, I think because you can't see the effects physically, it makes it hard for people to decide. Like watching the video, some people are very undecided on whether they should move or not, whether they should move temporarily or come back. But because you can't see it, like it's easy, for example, in a war-torn country, it's easy to say I'm moving because the bombs are dropping, or you know, I can see the effects.
Yeah, that's right.
But when your house looks the same, your neighborhood looks the same, it's hard to comprehend, I think. And perhaps that's why it's so difficult for people to even open up about the whole idea of reconstruction, because what is there to reconstruct?
Right.
So whereas with war, it's you can see it in the rules. So,
And once you've left, and life is hard, trying to relocate, make new friends, all that.
Right. And you have to do everything on your own, you know?
Whereas for people who have had to leave for disasters, everything's been, like as you
Yeah,
said, complete, like the bombs are falling, well, it's just not an option to go back. They just can't. And in their head, when they go, as bad as this is, that's going on there, but this would be a bizarre experience for that, because when they would imagine home, it would still look exactly the way that they've always known it, and that's how it is.
Yeah.
It would be so easy to go back to.
And you're obviously feeling that the two key things that really you see failing people in this situation is one, that there's not, that Japan as a community are not connected tightly in a supportive environment, and that they're encouraging people to stay quiet rather than allow them to have the...
Initially, when they picked the site, they decided to go there. They assumed that the general citizens, people of the area were reassured that it's going to be safe. And I guess culturally, over the years, we just assumed that everything was going to be alright. There's no evacuation plan. This is a result of this. Today, and I don't know. I guess just kind of throwing this out there, but it's as if you, as a community, you're aware that there is a nuclear power plant within X amount of radius of where you live. But the thought of a disaster like that happening, it doesn't register as to what to do. What would you do? Say, what if in a scenario? What is your kind of exit plan or something like that? And I guess now we're starting to see what those plans are, what initiatives they are. But it's kind of interesting that in that 40 years, even though you kind of assume or hope that nothing bad will happen, but you kind of also have to kind of assume that something bad will happen.
Well, there's like more than 50 nuclear power plants in Japan.
Right.
So to acknowledge that one is dangerous is pretty
Right.
Ever.
Right.
That's where all the things that we talk about comes together, because that's the Japanese government is not informing people properly and trying to keep it as quiet as possible, because they're wanting the political fallout for themselves, but also for the uranium industry and the people who are making money off it to be as small as possible. Because if everybody suddenly gets informed about what's going on and they swing against uranium energy, then that industry falls apart, and there's people who are making a lot of money off that. So they need to keep people ill-informed and then competing against each other for whatever the help, whatever limited resources they drip out, because otherwise they're going to turn their attention onto the people who caused it, which is, those companies making their money off these nuclear power plants.
Is it buying time to make more money?
I think not just buying time. I think they will just go. The interests of the community are not our top priority. Our interests are protecting our profits, and the governments are providing that protection. And I don't think it would be any different in Australia, to be honest. I mean, for one, Australia opened up to the British to do nuclear testing with dropping nuclear bombs on Aboriginal land where Aboriginal people are living, Maralumba. But even you think more recently in who's gone mine? What was that? What substance was that? It's just gone from my mind now. Asbestos, yeah. When they were mining, and it was clear that people were dying from it, but they suppressed the information about it because they didn't want people to find out, because they were protecting the interests of the mining companies, because they didn't want to lose their profits. And it comes back to competing for resources, which is, there is an abundance of resources in Australia if they were shared equally, but they're not. They're being funneled through to private profits. And how do you have a situation where there's a small number of people getting richer and richer, and this larger population that are missing out on those resources? That's the competition for the resources. And they're too small to ever fight. If an actual conflict breaks out, they're too small to ever fight back. So the way they make sure they don't ever get into that conflict is by going, ask the refugees are taking it. What you want is look over there, and causing conflict between other people who have not very much at all.
It's probably important because in the communities, I think communities usually affected by decisions that they don't make. For example, in Australia, some doesn't have the power to decide if a gas pipeline is good for their property, so they can't make that decision, especially with the nuclear industry. Because it's a profit industry now, the people that are being affected, such as people around British, don't get to have a say in that. So it should be it's part of the community impact process for them to decide what they need now to rebuild their lives, instead of someone else who's affected it.
Well, I think that's quite clear cut around the issue of mandatory detention, because people in detention are part of this campaign, and people in detention are holding protests, and they are speaking up for themselves. And all the choice for us then becomes: do we allow them to do this on their own, where they're getting tear gassed and locked up in isolation cells and getting denied visas because of their protest, or do we, as the community who can't be deported, do we join in? And that's definitely in refugee activism. That's been the focus, is that we go, well, this needs to be us, because other people have got too much else to lose, so we need to be there to support them.
It's essential to give for you to participate in order for their voice to be heard.
Yeah. Well, it is, but I mean, I suppose the other part of it is, it's not. This is not an issue that's only about people in detention or refugees. This does go to the core of who we are as a country and as a community. So it is important that we stand up for ourselves to say, what we're doing, you've crossed a line. This is not the way we should be behaving. This is not the type of people we should be. Because I think every time someone who is a recent migrant or something tries to speak out and criticises Australia, there is that conflict, and suddenly what may have been seen as acceptance before seems to wither away quite quickly. And the reason I noticed is because one of the refugee rights activists spoke at that protest, and she is not Zara, she's from Canada, but she's white, so I think she probably feels a bit more comfortable here. And she went on the criticising the Australian government and the way that they treated the Zaras here, and the fact they locked them up in detention centres while their families are still going through all these, being killed and persecuted back home. And that got the loudest applause of the day. It really got a lot of support, and even to the point a woman came up afterwards and just hugged her and was just crying, going, thank you, thank you, thank you. And it is, I get the sense that for people who have migrated to Australia, particularly if they're not white like me, there seems to be a sense that they're always having to go, don't push this conflict too much, because there's a concern what might come back. and possibly even people who were, you know, you'd consider friends and supportive of you. If it, you know, if you really push it and start criticising and going, things aren't okay with my experience here, then those friends can quickly turn on you.
Myself, I came here in 1999 by boat. I left my wife and 2 children, and I couldn't see them for 7 years because it was TPV visa for about 3 years, and then after that I faced the I don't know what's it called, Refugee Review Tribunal. So they decided that you are not a refugee, so and then they delayed for another year. So after that, when I went to the court, and then delayed again for another year. So it lasted for about 7 years when I went back and saw my children. If I didn't really have a problem, I couldn't cope it for 7 years to be far from wife and children. It's it's a really serious matter in Afghanistan, which is going since 150 years until now, like Pashtun and Hazaras. But most of the world, like, they are not aware of that situation, and it's been kept underneath. So that's how the people suffer. So as a human being, why is sort of things happening to another human? So we are the same, for example, generation for Adam, but different maybe face or speaking dialects. So that's why we have been created different face and skin and language, because we have to know each other more.
Yeah, I suppose what we're kind of interested to know is how, I can talk against a local issue, but it becomes global, and how we support, or how can we support global issues, like the struggle with the Hazaras from Australia or from Japan.
In Afghanistan, actually, so they're really behind of power. So like, there's no chance like the international or Commonwealth countries get involved to be aware of their situation and to do something for them. But over here in Australia, since 99 or 98, right now there's about 30,000 families around Australia, and it's growing up. And it's about 18 communities. The leader of the community, the whole community is in Adelaide, so he really tries to issue this matter as a global and international, and tries to that's how they work actually.
Because in the articles it's an out for reading before, there's some stories that I've read about in Japan, people that have had to move, have decided to leave their homes and evacuate and gone to new. Is this idea of trying to create a new home, to connect with a new space, and at the same time dealing with the grief of what you've left behind, as well as the guilt of who you've left behind, and not even having a choice, but you still people feel guilty. So I'd be particularly interested, and I think because you've got two different. Did you have to go into a detention centre when you came to Australia? So you've had, I think, two different experiences of arriving in Australia. I'd just be interested in what your experience has been and thoughts are on how you connect with the new space and create this to be your home. as well as addressing what you've left behind, the feelings about having left behind another home. You came out quite young, didn't you? But you imagine you still had a similar your family there.
Yeah. Despite the fact that I've been here for a while, I still do kind of have those questions within myself. And I think a lot of the times they come from the fact that, Australia is a home away from home, but at the same time, I'm not completely accepted as Australian, and I don't think I ever will be. And I think simply because of visibility, I'm very visible in the public space. It's easy for example, if you came from the UK, you're white. You could be an immigrant, but you look like everyone else. So visibility is a huge thing, and I think that can kind of alienate people. For example, like my brother was I think in Northbridge, and a police officer came up to him and said, "Hey, where are you from?" And he said, "I'm Australian." And he said, "Come on, mate, I'm serious. Where are you from?" And not to say that every Australian has that attitude. Of course not. There are a lot of people that are very accepting, but at the same time, it's I don't know. It exists. It exists. It happens. But I think for me, partly because of that, there's always a sense of there is a home, and because of the fact that I wasn't born here, although I came young, I know that there's a country that I belong to. This is a place that I'm living in temporarily. I don't know how long that temporary period will be, but it's still not quite home, and it will never be quite home. And sometimes it's hard when like for me, I went back to South Sudan for the first time in 2009 because I was born in the north, and I left the north when I was quite young. So even my memories of north are very few. But for me, even going back, I always had this concept living in Australia that now I'm going home. And I'm gonna love it. And, I had this romantic idea that I'd literally get off the plane and kiss the land. And, there was this sense of, I'm going home. And then I get there and it's like, okay, So there's this, because I'm connected to it because of it's my ancestral land. So, but the fact that I haven't lived there, and the fact that I've lived here longer, yet even living in Australia, I don't feel Australian, and then going back home, I think I'm Southern Sudanese, growing up in Australia, and then you go back home and it's like, it's not quite, it's probably because I'm not used to it, and I'm sure that over time, if I was to live there for about 5 years, it would be perfectly fine. But I find that with a lot of young people, there's a real conflict within yourself of, okay, where do I really belong? Yes, I'm Southern Sudanese, but if I go there, it's not quite my space. It's not quite.
When I came up from the detention center, so we didn't have any Hazara community. So by talking like friends, and for example, which I heard from the other Hazaras, and then they found themselves like they belong to some tribe and they belong to some background, and then they said, we have to make a community, and we have to exist our tribe and our background, for example, who we are belong to and where we come from, and also to support the rest life, for example, if we can. So it is something like it brings up itself, for example, the tribe, or for example, nationality. Then they work it out, so now it's like 18 community.
So it must have been very, very hard at first.
Of course, yeah, definitely. So, for example, we started from zero over here. Like I didn't know English at all.
what you're going through and what Ramsey's going through, and I think probably even for yourself, I mean, you seem to not just have moved, but be alternating between two places as well. Is that this is the story, Australia's cultural story. Like what you've gone through is exactly what Greek and Italian migrants went through, what Vietnamese migrants went through. It's what British settlers and the Irish went through when they got here, being in a completely different land, having no idea how to fit in. And it's what Aboriginal people went through, because when they were displaced, they found themselves in, we have this, still the colonial notion of Australia being this one country, and that Aboriginal people have never left their country. Well, there were over 200 countries in this continent, and they had to move. Because of colonisation, they were forced off and ended up living in somebody else's country. So then they found themselves living in a new country where the language wasn't the same, where all of their cultural connections and everything no longer were there for them. They were left in that other place, and now they suddenly had to fit into somebody else, another Aboriginal group's country. And I suppose, being sixth generation white Australian, it's something that when I look back over how my parents, my grandparents interact, and then further, it's not one purely of like white culture or nationalist culture. It is something of a political economic system which has produced this, and it's been quite recent. I mean, it's been in the last 30, 40 years, because the experience of my parents and grandparents in dealing with these things would have been completely different. And I think if we address that, it would also pretty quickly undo things like mandatory detention. Like we just would never even, if we were having these discussions in a real way, there's no way we'd contemplate ever welcoming somebody by locking them in a detention centre. That would be the most absurd thing